All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
And it's amazing how then you work back from that and you say, all right, do we need to allocate more resources for a hockey rink? Well, okay, what does the hockey rink have to do with that mission? Well, in our case, we do develop body and character, but hockey rinks are really expensive, and most of our kids don't play hockey. So unless we're going to add Canadian to a fourth language, bad joke, we don't need a hockey rink. So let's stop talking about the hockey rink.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, everyone. My guest today is Peter Gudmundsson, and Peter is the president of the board for International Leadership of Texas Charter Schools, a large network of over 22 campuses, more than 20,000 students across the state of Texas. Now, Peter has a wide-ranging and successful business background, and so what we're going to do is link to his full bio in the show notes. I'll just, for the sake of brevity, provide some quick notables and cherry-pick a few things that Peter's done in his career. In his day job, Peter currently serves as the CEO of BeHome 24/7, which is a leading provider of unified property management technology for operators in hospitality and residential real estate. But prior to BeHome 24/7, Peter served as the chief executive for a host of other companies. I'll just name a few here. The Pet Loss Center, Recruit Military. He helped run the Dropout and Truancy Prevention Network. He was the CEO of Beckett Media, Design Guide Publishing, and Jobs.com, just to name a few. Peter's also a regular media contributor. He's appeared on C-SPAN and has published opinion pieces in Forbes, The Washington Post, U.S. News and World Report, The Hill, The Christian Science Monitor, and many others. Peter's also an author of two separate books, Not Done Yet, a college to career transition guide for parents, and the Veteran Hiring Leaders Handbook. Peter's a former U.S. Marine, field artillery, and intelligence officer. He's a graduate of Harvard Business School and Brown University, and he serves as the honorary consul for the Republic of Iceland in Texas. He's also a member of YPO, that's the Young Presidents Organization, and he's married to his wife Kathleen, and they have 4 adult children and live in Dallas. In the episode today, Peter and I talk about the role of the board in leading a charter organization and really thinking about specifically strategic planning and how to drive alignment and consistency across an organization, as well as accountability for the top leaders within an organization. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, and we'll get right into it. All right. Well, Peter, I really appreciate you being here and super excited for our conversation today. I wanted to start just by framing the conversation with some terms. So we're going to be talking about strategic planning today and really the role of the board driving an organization. And the term strategic planning gets thrown around a lot. But from your perspective, what really is strategic planning? What should it be? And maybe what should it not be or not encompass? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, any organization, and a charter school is no different. It's really figuring out what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And that's very easily said, but not that easily done. And in fact, a lot of time has to be spent on determining the goals. What are you trying to accomplish? Once that's sort of phase one. Once you have that, then planning quite literally is how are you going to go about achieving those goals? And again, at the strategic level, and we'll probably talk, I'm suspecting today, a lot about the difference between strategy, operations, and tactics. It's 3 different levels, but strategy is what are you trying to accomplish? How are you going to get there? I use a historical military example. The U.S. found itself in World War II at the end of 1941, and the strategy was take on Germany first, and then hold Japan off until you can have the resources to deal with Japan too. That's a strategy. And then operations and tactics fall from that. So, Yeah, it's not widely known. And even people who play computer games confuse strategy and tactics sometimes, and real-time strategy games and things like that. But strategy, it's a very high-level view of what you're trying to accomplish.
Great. So, you mentioned really setting the goals, regardless of the organization, whether we're talking about a charter school or a business. Some of those things are ubiquitous. As you think about strategic planning, it sounds like goal setting is really the critical starting place. How do you think about that in the context of boards change from time to time, environments change? How have you all at ILT thought about goal setting? Was that something that, as the board changed, you said, let's go back and sort of redo our strategic plan? How do you think about sort of the cadence of goal setting?
It's something that shouldn't be changed willy-nilly. Think of it almost like a constitution. You can change laws and regulations at a city council meeting or a state legislature, or even the U.S. Congress. Well, they don't do that anymore. But anyway, at the state level and the local level, you can do that. But you shouldn't change the Constitution just because you feel like something. So strategy is a constitutional thing. As new board members come on at International Leadership of Texas, we have an onboarding process to make sure, both formal and informal, that they get up to speed first about understanding what brought us to where we are today. I should also mention a theme that you'll hear when we talk about International Leadership of Texas is that the founding superintendent, who's still our superintendent, Eddie Conger, was a career Marine Corps officer. And a lot of us on the board have military backgrounds. I was a Marine also, of roughly the same vintage. He stayed in for a career. I just had an initial period of service. But we have common vocabulary because of that. And that very much informs our approach to what leadership is, both in what we teach our students, but also how we run our organization. So onboarding new board members, we look for certain skill sets, certain backgrounds to complement the whole group. We have 7 members right now, for example, and I think off the top of my head, 4 or 5 of us have a military background. And so that really helps speed up the process of understanding that dynamic between strategy, operations, and tactics.
Right. And how do you think about the relationship between board goals? You mentioned really those should not be willy-nilly. They're almost the constitution of the organization, and maybe, every so often you're looking at those. It sounds like you all have done a good job on the board of making sure that you have shared terminology, and certainly the shared military background aids in that. But how do you think about ensuring board level goals are aligned with goals maybe at the local level, meaning at an individual campus? When you all set out to build your strategic plan, for example, what was that process like? How much of that is goals driven by what you're seeing at the campus level versus goals holistically that the board has to move the organization from A to B over, say 5 years?
It's an overused phrase, but it's an iterative process. It's getting data from the field at the campus, at the classroom level, at the individual level, to the classroom, to the school, we have areas as well, because we have over 23,000 students. And so we have area superintendents all the way up to the system superintendent. So that's a lot of layers. So we look for data and themes, and do they support or not support? So a classic example is the 2 key differentiators about what we do at International Leadership of Texas. It's a bit of a mouthful, so sometimes we just say IL Texas, but it is the trilingual approach to the curriculum of English, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese, and also the emphasis on leadership. So if you walk around one of our schools, and by the way, we have 25, including a few in construction, campuses total, and they all kind of look the same, similar architecture, similar interior design, similar leadership maxims, leadership traits and principles, and so on the wall. A fair number of them are plagiarized from the military, but they are leadership traits and principles that are universal, and the military's done a very good job at distilling those into a few words that anyone, including students K through 12, can understand. But anyway, so with that, with those 2 key differentiators, a great example is the trilingual. So all the time we are asking, all right, how's that working? Because the trilingual approach, and I am not a pedagogue per se, we have a great academic staff, but the trilingual approach takes a little bit of a faith in the early years, because some of our test scores will sometimes lag, or especially English language or even math scores will lag comparable benchmarks in the first few years, because frankly, we're exposing our kids to a lot of different languages.
Sure.
But if one believes in, as I do personally, in the benefits of brain development with three languages, by high school and certainly by college and beyond, the benefits start to manifest. And so, but you have to sort of be faithful. Like, hey, why are our second grade English language scores a little bit behind where we would like them to be? They're like, well, because they're spending time on Spanish and Chinese also. And so if we just drilled on English vocabulary or grammar, we would do better, but at a cost of not developing those other parts of the brain that we believe so strongly in. But that said, because that's sort of a faith that we have to have, a confidence in our mission, we do constantly test that faith. All right, is that right? Is it too much Chinese, too little Chinese? I mean, for example, this is more of a personal thing. It's not a structural thing. I'm known on the board as a little bit of a Chinese skeptic. I think studying any language is useful. I just think Chinese is really, really hard. And so sometimes I'm the voice, because I think it's really important to hear different voices, and debate different issues. I'm thinking, look, is that time we're spending on Chinese, could we get better at Spanish? Or is there another language that might be useful? And we always come back to, no, Chinese is the way to do it and all that. But it's important to ask those questions, again, at the strategic, not at the tactical level. We're not asking, why is Mrs. Wong introducing verbs in the second semester, not the first semester? No, we're not doing that. That's not a board level appropriate thing.
Great. So kind of zooming in all the way into classroom level, if I'm understanding kind of what you described, zooming into classroom specific challenges, but mapping that backwards to say,
yes,
let's look at the
aggregate data and draw conclusions from that. Another example is college prep. This is a classic strategic, I'll call it dilemma that's hard to solve. Every school I've ever been associated with, whether it be attending or at the board level or being a parent, I have 4 adult children now, they all brag about, look, Johnny got into Yale. I'm like, great, that's wonderful, because Johnny's really, really smart, and Johnny probably would have been fine wherever he went to school. So I sound like a little bit of a skeptic when I say that. I'm less interested in Johnny who's going to Yale. I'm more interested in the other 400 kids who might have a little bit better outcomes in life, whatever that is, that may not include Yale, but may include a whole bunch of different paths. So at a strategic level, I'm often pushing for the question, and you have to be careful. You don't want to demoralize, because the college placement staff, they're very excited about Johnny going to Yale. That's really great. They're taking a victory lap. It's like a medal for an Olympian. They're all excited about that. And so you have to be very careful how you phrase it. I hope I'm careful when I phrase it, but I want to know, well, what about everybody else? So I'm interested in longitudinal data. How many people are going to college at all? Or how many people are going to vocations? Are they finishing their programs? What do they look like at age 22, 24, 26? And what can we draw from that to influence how we're teaching high schoolers today? And we teach high schoolers based on how we teach middle schoolers and lower schoolers. So our K-8 as we call it. So anyway, my point is that those are examples of strategic issues that sometimes are, by the way, never resolved. There's just tension. Raising all boats versus raising a few is a dilemma that will never really be resolved, but it has to be worked with all the same.
So I want to go back to, you used the word iterative. So as you're talking about, maybe it's a buzzword, but it's the reality that you have these strategic goals and you need to evaluate them. And you also need to do what you just described, zooming into what's happening at the classroom level, looking at the data, not taking the data at face value, but saying, hey, maybe our literacy scores are down because we're teaching 3 languages, and then how does that map to our strategic goal? So I want to draw on maybe some perspectives you have on how a board can think about developing a strategic plan, and you could share examples, either from your personal business career life or at ILT. What recommendations would you have for a board that maybe says, hey, we've had our goals in place for a number of years, and we think it's time to develop a new strategic plan? You kind of alluded to asking some of those first principles questions when you were describing some of the bigger questions that you all are asking of your students. But where would you recommend is a good starting place in developing a strategic plan? And maybe a follow-up to that would be, are there any tangible examples of how you all at ILT have iterated upon your strategic plan?
Yeah, a lot of it, and here's a military phrase again. That's why I said at the beginning, forgive me in advance for the military phrases, but desired end state is a great phrase. What does it look like? What does success look like? And then you move back from that. So in our case, it's in our mission statement. We talk about preparing students for exceptional leadership roles in the international community by emphasizing servant leadership, mastering English, Spanish, Chinese languages, and strengthening the mind, body, and character. Some of that is a little bit sounds boilerplate. Every mission statement, be good, change the world, we love the planet. Those stuff is great. But in ours, it's actually very specific. It's leadership, international, and 3 languages. I mean, that is a very clear view. So we want to make sure. So if, for example, the desired end state is to have students that reflect that mission statement, and we find that we're graduating seniors who do not have that, who have not achieved that. And some of that's intangible, some of it's tangible. And for example, an intangible is comfortable in the international system. Even if you studied those 3 languages and you find yourself in Egypt, where you've never studied Arabic, but you've studied 3 other languages, and you have the confidence that you can tackle Arabic if that's what's necessary. And that's needed. And so that desired end state will drive back. And so, we met at a conference of 200 something different Texas charter schools. And so many have different different missions. It could be STEM, could be other intangible things that they're looking for. And then even outside the charter world, where you end up with, faith-based institutions or whatever, they may have other outcomes that they're working towards. But again, being very clear on what those are. And it's amazing how then you work back from that and you say, all right, do we need to allocate more resources for a hockey rink? Well, okay, what does the hockey rink have to do with that mission? Well, in our case, we do develop body and character, but hockey rinks are really expensive, and most of our kids don't play hockey. So unless we're going to add Canadian to a 4th language, bad joke, we don't need a hockey rink. So let's stop talking about the hockey rink. And by the way, that was totally theoretical. We're not talking about hockey rinks.
I was just going to ask, are you guys launching an ice hockey team down in Texas?
To my knowledge, no. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, that's just an example of that end state will make things clear. And I think usually where the clarity is lacking, that's where organizations, whether for-profit or not-for-profit schools or public schools, either way, when you lose track of your primary mission, and then your primary may include secondary and tertiary missions as well. It's not just reading and writing. I get that in a modern way. However, if once you lose track of that, then the planning gets very difficult, because then you just have a Hobbesian war of interests competing for resources, which of course every organization is to some degree. But as long as you have a very clear mission statement and you adhere to that, it's amazing how it does engender clarity 90% of the time.
I want to dig into that a little bit, because I think clarity across the organization gets more challenging as you scale. And obviously you all have scaled and grown tremendously and are continuing to grow. And so how does the board think about, as it relates to setting strategic goals, keeping the organization accountable, iterating upon those goals? How do you all think about representation from, or maybe input is a better term, from across the network in terms of ensuring clarity, ensuring shared terminology? Do you all have a process for making sure that you're getting input from across the entire network? And how do you identify maybe lack of clarity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to hone in a little bit. You mentioned growth, and that's a key issue in our case, for example, and a very strategic issue is we've been adding campuses every year. We spend a lot of board attention on real estate matters, buying land, selecting contractors, approving contracts, that sort of thing. And I'm sure we drive the administration a little bit crazy, because we play the role of contrarian. They'll say, hey, we want to build a new campus, in this location. We'll say, why? Aren't we growing too fast? And they'll say, all right, so we don't want to build that campus. Why? Why aren't we growing faster? So it's a little bit of we play the role of the debate partner to take the opposite side. I think it's a really healthy governance practice to make the administration justify. And some of those things are judgment calls. Like, for example, we have 3 campuses under contract. Could we have 5? Probably, but would that be stretching us a little bit too far from a recruiting standpoint and resources and so on? So again, there's no right or wrong answer. Sometimes it's really just a matter of going through that process. So we find that most of the time, consensus is an overused word, and I don't want to sound, too East Asian culturally, whether it's Japanese or Chinese or whatever. Getting to consensus, that can actually lead an organization astray if you don't have tolerance and celebration of alternate views. You want to hear it out, but in most cases, it's very rare. Very, very, I can't think of an example offhand where the board says, no, superintendent, you're not going to do that. You're going to do this because we're in charge. It's not like that. Most of it is conversational, and back to that word, iterative. And both sides will take hints at things. Like, is a theoretical example. Couldn't we be building a 4th campus right now? And you just look at the body language of the staff, and they're like, Yeah, we could. You're like, okay, so they've been pushed a little too hard. You don't need a hard metric for that. Human insight and emotional intelligence will tell you, all right, we're pushing a little too hard for new campuses. Let's focus on doing really well with the folks that we have and the staff that we have and the growth plan that we have. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's how we approach it.
Yeah, no, I think it's super helpful. And I think the kind of tag on question to that is thinking about, so clarity is one piece, super important when it comes to governance. The next would maybe be accountability. So as the organization grows, growth is a good problem to have. Clearly you all are doing things right to have that problem. As you think about accountability, let's start with just thinking about the organization on the whole. So let's put the board leadership relationship to the side for a second and come back to that. But on the whole, as an organization, as a board, have you all put, metrics in place, KPIs? How do you think about evaluating, like, hey, we're growing, we have these missional goals. Yep. How do we check ourselves on a regular basis? What does that look like for you all?
Yeah, so there's a lot to that. There's a formal level and there's an informal level. And actually, I should throw in a quick joke that, well, not really a joke, but it's actually a little bit of a quip that informs my thinking. Years ago, one of my first boards that I managed was actually a .com about 23 years ago, jobs.com. And I had a very wise board member who said, a board member only has two questions that he or she needs to ask themselves. Number one, do we have the right CEO? And two, how can I support the CEO? And it's really very clarifying that way. And so that we approach things the same way. But to answer the first question, do we have the right CEO? We have both an informal and a formal process. The informal process is, again, back to that iteration, that conversational approach. So I have myself and the vice president on our board. We have lunch with the CEO, the superintendent, the area superintendent every month. The week before the board meeting, it helps us set the agenda for the board meeting, and we can talk in a casual way about what's going on and give feedback in an informal manner, which is really helpful. And in addition to, phone calls and texts and that sort of thing, the board meetings tend to be so formal and so regulated that they're really not deliberative. They're more reporting and approval, formal approval processes than they are conversational or deliberative. So that's the informal side. And the formal side, we have an annual process. We rank our CEO on about 30 different criteria. They're bundled into, I have it in front of me actually, they're bundled into about 5 or 6 different groups. And it's everything from, and every board member ranks privately from, outstanding, exceeds expectations, meets expectations, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory in each of these categories. I then personally tabulate them all, come to averages for the 7 board members, what we all thought. We get together, we discuss outliers. I mean, some of it is, a classic example, writes clearly and concisely, and everyone says, yeah, he writes really well, and that's the end of it. And there's not much more to talk about, or, dresses appropriately, things like that. No one's going to say, hey, you had a stain on your blazer last month. What was that about? I mean, again, that's back to micromanagement. But it's big picture stuff, community relations or staff relations. This is, again, entirely theoretical. This has not happened. But, hey, you had 3 senior direct reports quit in the last quarter. What's going on? We're not going to wait for an annual report for that. We're going to get into it a little bit and figure out why. Is that just a weird coincidence? Or is something, and that's where, for example, exit interviews become very important. And it is fair to have a sort of executive session, not the whole board probably, but 1 or 2 board members might be designated to conduct an exit interview to figure out, or why is this person just leaving for a better opportunity for them or their families? Great. Wish them well and chalk that as a win for us as an organization. But if there's a pattern, we need to know about that. So anyway, so that annual process is very important, and it's tied into a bonus structure and all that, which actually in this setting it's not like the civilian world or the for-profit world where that can really drive behaviors. I think the bonus is more of a thank you, attaboy type payment because it's just not that material to the grand scheme of things. But anyway, so that's how we approach it, informal and formal, and it's worked quite well.
Thinking about the broader organization, so you shared a lot on sort of the core, do we have the right person in the CEO seat? What does it look like to evaluate them? And, it sounds like you all have developed a very clear evaluation metric for that. What about goals for the entire organization? Do you have a similar evaluation process to say, hey, here's the
the strategic mission, here's the goals underneath that mission, and then here's sort of like the mid-layer leading indicators, if you will, that we look at. Do you all have certain data points that you look at every board meeting?
It's not so much formal and informal because they're all formal, but I would say external versus internal. So the external is the state does require various, campus grading systems and so on. And so there's a whole bunch of, the whole purpose of charter schools was to escape bureaucracy. Well, they've just reestablished new bureaucracy. Hopefully it's a little bit better than the independent school districts as a whole, but it's still, the state does have its oversight that we have to be very mindful of, both to keep our charter healthy and also, to be fair, most of the regulations are established in good faith, and we don't disagree that they're important things, but they vary in importance. And so, in fact, again, it's easy for me to say as a volunteer in this role, I can be a little more flippant than the full-time working administrators. I often ask the question, all right, the state says we have to do this, but is it really important? What does it really tell us? Is it a good metric? Doesn't matter. We're going to measure it regardless because we have to. It's the rules. But should we pay attention to it? Like I drive Dr. Laura Carrasco, our head of academics, does a great job. And I'm always asking, okay, this campus was rated a B. Is that a good B? It's kind of like we ask our own kids, hey, I got a B in math. A B in math might be a big disappointment because you've always been good at math, and until this type of math, something went wrong. Or maybe math is not your skill, you're more of a verbal reasoning person, and you worked really hard for that B. That's why a B is just a letter until you understand the context for what it is. And that's a good example of back to end states and all that. One thing I'm sort of proud of that I've worked to push on the board in my 4 years here and now my second year as board president is the use of benchmarks. So very often we'll hear that a given campus was rated a B by the TEA. I'm like, well, wait, if that's a really rough neighborhood where the local ISD is traditionally a D and sometimes an F, that B is a huge achievement, and let's take a victory lap. On the other hand, if it's an otherwise well-off district, comparatively well-off district, and the local ISD is getting an A and we're getting a B, okay, what's going on here? Because why do we exist if we can't do better than the local public alternative? And so that's a great example of getting right back to foundational principles. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? And so we're very strict. Our board really pushes on that. But it also, I think it's really important, just like that, back to that B example that we do with an individual child, our own child perhaps, who earns a B, you have to understand the context of it. Is it an embarrassment or a reason for celebration or just somewhere in the middle? That's really, really important. And I think that's where the relationship between the board, even though the board is holding the administration accountable directly to the CEO and therefore indirectly to his direct reports, it's really important to allow them to speak up. And in fact, sometimes I ask these questions, I almost get a look like I'm asking for a mutiny. I'm not. I just want to say, look, yeah, this report or this test has strengths and weaknesses like any test or any evaluation. It's like, yeah, we did really well on the 100-meter dash. That doesn't tell me anything about upper body strength. I don't know if you can do pull-ups or get over the wall if you have a really fast 100-meter dash. So explain to me what a 100-meter dash really means by analogy. So that's really what we very much push for.
Are there any internal, you kind of differentiated between internal and external benchmarks, which I think is really helpful. And I appreciate the push towards let's put data in context and read it within, the environment that we should be reading the data. Are there any internal benchmarks that you all have introduced that have uncovered challenges within the organization, maybe benchmarks that are not the typical ones that you all have developed, or any internal benchmarks that you would maybe recommend other boards think about introducing that have been helpful?
Yeah, we're trying to do some work around, I forgot the exact phrase, but I think it's something like college, work, or military ready, I think is the phrase. I'm not getting it quite right, but I do think that we're making a lot of progress, and I'd like to see continued progress in thinking creatively about that. I think as a society, we're starting to question the rush to a 4-year degree for more and more people, and we're wondering whether there are alternate paths, again, whether they be vocational in terms of skilled trades, or military, of course, military enlistment. We have a very vibrant junior Marine ROTC program, and I think that has influenced some to seek military service as the first step right after high school. I think we can get more creative there, but that's a great example of how it's hard. It depends what you measure. So we measure that readiness more holistically than that. Now that said, I think we require all of our students to apply to a college at least. And again, in some of these demographics, that's not assumed. And that's another area where we are trying to do work that's been difficult is longitudinal data. I mentioned it earlier, but I really think it's important. I would really like to understand. I was spoiled a little bit. When I first came on the board, my previous experience was 8 years on the board of a very elite girls' school here in Dallas called the Hockaday School. And they have longitudinal data literally going back 100 years. And they know so much about what happens to graduates because the graduates stay in touch, and frankly they give a lot of money back to the school and so on. And so we don't have that benefit yet, and that's an area where I'd really like to see us continue to grow, is understanding longitudinal data and getting feedback from you don't get much from a 19-year-old. I don't think. It's just it's school's out for summer, like the old song goes. But I do think it's amazing. I know from my own kids are 24 to 30, and it's amazing how they get really reflective in their mid to late 20s, where, this is what worked out. I wish I had listened to Mrs. Smith about this. She was right. Turns out, I don't know why I fought back. Or I wish I had more of this or less of that. And I think that sort of data in aggregate can really inform the product back to that end state that we're producing.
Super fascinating. Well, as we bring things to a close here, what are some of the things that you all are working on right now at the board, Peter? What's top of mind for you? You mentioned, you alluded to growth, but what are some of the things that you all have on the horizon? What are some of the things you're excited about?
Yeah, the ongoing, the growth of campuses is exciting. And again, but in a very measured way. I joke that the great American Casey Kasem used to say on his American Top 40, keep your feet on the ground, but keep reaching for the stars. And that's another thing that a board has to do, is keep reaching for and encouraging the board in aggressive plans on the one hand, or ambitious is probably a better word, ambitious plans, but at the same time stay grounded and make sure we're delivering the today. We don't want to be like the dog chasing the last squirrel. I mean, we have to stay grounded in what we're trying to do. So that sort of growth is exciting. International programs are really exciting. We've done a really good job. Here's a good example of an operational level challenge we've had, is obtaining and recruiting and retaining high quality teachers. Like, for example, about this time a year ago, we were over 100 teachers short on our campuses. Now, as of 3 weeks ago, we were like 15 teachers short. And part of the way we closed that gap was wider recruiting in general. We started recruiting in surrounding states and so on. But we've also gone international and recruited teachers from East Asia in particular. And especially with the Chinese language, that's very helpful. We have J1 visas and that sort of thing. But there's an example of getting creative to solve the problem. And then again, it feeds right back into our mission of the international community and exposure to get high quality teachers who might come from not necessarily Chinese language, but also Filipino or Korean and so on. I think even Thai. I mean, so that's an example of some exciting thinking beyond the lens of just Texas, but thinking in the global way that, again, in our mission, we say that we do.
Very cool. Yeah, I love the operational example, and, certainly exciting times ahead for you all as an organization. Any final recommendations you would have for, maybe boards that feel like we're kind of in the midst of feeling like we've lost our way a little bit? You all have a very distinct mission. You've done a good job of recruiting others to the board that have, shared terminology, shared background, can drive that mission forward. Any sort of final recommendations you would give for others who are listening to this, that whether they're an administrator or maybe on the board, for recommendations for sort of resetting things and moving forward with a clear vision, mission, etc.?
Yeah, two things. One, and again, I'm a huge believer in not micromanaging, staying at the strategic level. That said, get into the schools, visit the campuses, and you realize things are a little bit dog and ponied for you when you come to the campus. That's and there's no way. I've never tried to sneak in with a disguise or something, because we have security rules against that, thankfully. But it's kind of like, I remember there was an old Marine general joke that somebody said, well, what do you remember from your 30 years in the Marine Corps? And he said, the smell of fresh paint. Because wherever he went, they had just painted. And so, so anyway, but that said, I think it's really important to get into the schools because you will leave energized. If you don't leave energized, it's time to resign. Because there's something wrong with you if you're not energized being around those kids. And likewise, graduations. Graduations are a great time to, we stand on the stage and in academic robes and shake so many hands that you really feel sorry for politicians on how much it hurts after a while. Shake so many hands, and it's really exciting. Now that said, that gets your emotional state in the right frame of mind. Then revisit, why are we here? And even put on the table, because maybe we shouldn't be here. I mean, question your own existence as an organization, because that will cause you to go back to first principles. Because maybe we don't have a reason to exist. Maybe 15 years ago we launched with, STEM mission, and it turns out the STEM mission is no longer valid for whatever reason. Okay, then it's okay it's one of our problems, I think, as a society. Enough people, or even, politicians or leaders of various sorts don't say, you know what, I've put in a good fight, it's time to go home. And the old Roman story of Cincinnatus, fought the battle, saved the republic, and then went back to his farm. That we need more people like that. And organizations, same thing. Maybe it's time to fold that. Now, again, it's not human nature. It's certainly not organizational nature. But go back to first principles. Why do you exist? And if you can't get excited about them, it's time to move on personally, if not move on collectively.
Well, Peter, I really appreciate you being here, sharing some of the things that you all are thinking through on the board at ILT. Really excited about the growth you're seeing, and appreciate the insights that you've shared today. So thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.